My children abandoned me after everything I did for them. They left me to die.
This video went viral. The video got 300,000 views in 48 hours. People were furious. Comments poured in like floodwater. Wicked children, ungrateful daughters. This is what happened when you raise girls. They leave. The old man became a symbol, a martyr, a warning. But nobody asked the question that mattered the most. Why did they leave? His name was Emmanuel Chukwuemeka, and from the moment he married Ngozi in 1994, he had one dream, one obsession, one prayer: a son. Not family, not happiness, not even love. A son. Something to carry his name forward, to prove to his father's ghost that he had not failed as a man. Ngozi knew this. She had known it from the wedding night when Emmanuel leaned close and said, "Give me a boy and I will give you the world." She had smiled. She had believed him. The first daughter came in 1995. They named her Adaeze. Emmanuel held her at the hospital. He looked at her for a long moment, this tiny, wrinkled, perfect thing, and handed her back to the nurse. "Next time," he said, and walked out. Next time was 1997. Another girl, they named her Chisom. Then 1999, Ugochi. Then 2001, Amara. By the time Adana arrived in 2003, Emmanuel had stopped coming to the hospital altogether. Ngozi lay on the delivery table, no husband beside her, just a midwife who smelled of antiseptic and quiet pity. She had held her fifth daughter to her chest and whispered, "You are not a mistake. You hear me? You are not a mistake." She said it like she needed to hear it herself. The house they lived in was in Ajegunle. Two rooms, a ceiling that leaked when it rained, a landlord who knocked every first of the month like he was auditioning for something violent. Emmanuel worked intermittently, a construction job here, a delivery contract there. Money came and went like a man with no intention to stay. And every time the money disappeared, Emmanuel's voice filled the house. "It is because of you people. Five mouths, five useless mouths, and not one of them a son. I am cursed. God is punishing me through this woman." Ngozi never shouted back. She had learned that silence was armor. She would stand in the kitchen, which was just really a corner with a kerosene stove, and stir a pot of watery soup, and let his words fall around her like rain she had decided not to feel. But the girls felt it, every single word. Adeze, the eldest, who was 9 by then, would gather her sisters in the back room and pressed her fingers to her lips. "Shh, daddy is talking. Don't cry." Crying makes him louder. Then came 2005. Ngozi was pregnant again. Emmanuel had told his friends at the beer parlor that this one was different. He had gone to a prayer house. He had fasted. He had given an offering the size of 3 months' rent. "This one is a boy," he told anyone who would listen. "God has finally heard me." The delivery was difficult. 3 hours, a lot of blood, and at the end of it, a cry. Sharp, healthy, furious, filled the room. The midwife looked at Emmanuel. He searched her face for the answer before she could speak. She didn't need to say anything. He already knew. Another girl. He didn't shout at the hospital. He was too tired for shouting. He sat in the plastic chair outside the ward and stared at the floor for a very long time. Then he went home. He was sitting in the parlor when Ngozi came back 2 days later. Baby Chidera bundled against her chest, five daughters trailing behind her like small nervous planets. He looked at all of them, and something in him, whatever thread had been holding everything together, finally snapped. "Get out." Ngozi stopped walking. "Emmanuel," I said, "get out of my house." His voice was low, controlled, more frightening than any shouting. "You and these girls, you are the reason I have nothing. You are the reason God has turned his back on me. I want you all to be out before morning." Adeze was 10 years old. She stood at the door with her school bag still on her back and watched her father's face. And she thought for the first and last time, maybe he is right. Maybe we are the problem. But she would spend the next 20 years unlearning that thought. They slept at Ngozi's sister's place for 3 days. Her sister had 4 children of her own, and her husband, who made it clear, not with words but with silences and looks, that guests had an expiry date. On the fourth day, Ngozi packed everything she owned into two Ghana must-go bags and took her daughters to the only place she could think of, an uncompleted building behind the market in Mushin. No windows, no doors, just concrete and the smell of open gutter nearby. She put the bags down. Chidera was still strapped to her back. The five older girls stood in a row and looked at the cracked floor and dark, empty rooms. Ugochi, who was 6 and had never quite learned to regulate her feelings, started to cry. Mama, she said, are we going to die here? Ngozi crouched down to her level. She took her daughter's face in both arms, rough, warm hands that had cooked 1,000 meals and carried 1,000 worries. We are not going to die, she said, but I need you to be a big girl for me. Can you do that? Ugochi wiped her nose with the back of her hands. Yes, Mama. Good, Ngozi said and stood up. Then let's start. Starting meant waking up at 4 a.m. It meant borrowing 3,000 naira from a market woman who knew her face and trusted her eyes. It meant buying pure water sachets in bulk and loading them into plastic basin that she balanced on her head like it weighed nothing, even though it weighed everything. She walked the go slow on Oshodi Expressway. Cars crawled, downfall drivers shouted, fumes hung up in the morning air like something you had agreed to breathe. Ngozi moved between the vehicles with Chidera strapped to her back, holding up sachet water bags, calling out in a voice stripped of embarrassment. Pure water, cold water, 20 naira. Adeze at 10 took the younger ones to school, a public school where the teachers were sometimes there and sometimes not, and then came back to help in the afternoon. Chisom, who was 8, had already learned to cook rice without burning it. They were children doing the work of adults, and they did it without being asked. The hunger was the hardest part, not the dramatic movie kind of hunger, the quiet kind, the kind where dinner was garri and granuts and everyone pretended it was enough, the kind where Ngozi will serve the girls first and sit with her own empty plate and say she wasn't hungry. And Adeze, even at 10, knew that was a lie and felt something harden in her chest that would later become stew. There were nights when it rained and water came through the open window spaces and soaked the foam mats they all shared, and Ngozi would gather her daughters around her in the dry corner and tell them stories. Not sad stories, not angry stories, stories about women who started with nothing and ended up with everything. You are not poor, she told them one of those wet nights. Chidera asleep across our laps. We are just between chapters. It was just another morning. Ngozi and the girls were ready for their daily hockey, but this was the day things started shifting in the right direction for them. But before I tell you that, make sure you are subscribed. The keke man's name was Babatunde. He was not particularly old, maybe 50, but sickness had made him look ancient. He had a keke napep he rode from Mushin to Yaba every morning, and one afternoon, he flagged Ngozi down at a bus stop near his house. Sister, he said, his voice was thin and raspy, I have been watching you sell water for months. You are strong, I can see that. Ngozi looked at him. She had no time for conversation that didn't end in money. My point is this, he continued before she could leave. I am sick. I cannot ride this keke anymore. But I have children in school. If someone can ride it and give me 40% every week, I will be grateful to God. She stared at the keke. I don't know how to ride it. Babatunde smiled. Do you want to learn? She looked at her water basin, at her cracked sandals, at the evening traffic swallowing people whole. Then she looked back at him. When do we start? She fell 3 times on the first day. The keke tilted on the uneven road and threw her sideways. And the second time she hit the ground, she sat there for a moment with her palm bleeding and the afternoon sun watching her without mercy. Adeze had come to watch. She was standing by the side of the road, 11 years old, arms folded, face unreadable. Mama, are you okay? Ngozi looked at her palm, looked at the keke, stood up. I'm fine. By the end of the second week, she could navigate the Mushin roundabout without flinching. By the end of the month, she knew every pothole between her route and Yaba, like she had personally named them. The morning she rode alone for the first time, Babatunde watching from his doorway, daughters waving from the compound. She gripped the handlebars and felt something shift inside of her. Not pride exactly, something quieter, something more permanent. I can do this. Money changed slowly, not all at once, not dramatically, but it changed. The 40% she paid Babatunde still left enough for her to feed the guests properly, then enough to buy a door for the building, then enough to pay the school fees levies that had been hanging over their heads like a small persistent shame. After 18 months, she had saved enough to deposit on her own keke, hire purchase from a man in Agege who asked too many questions but eventually said yes. Now the money was fully hers. She started earlier, worked later. On Sundays, she rested, not because she wanted to, but because Adeze had started insisting. 13 years old and already managing her mother's schedule. like a small, serious accountant. You will collapse, Adeze told her one Sunday. And if you collapse, we will have nothing. Rest. Ngozi laughed. It was the first real laugh in a long time. Since when did you become my mother? Since when you needed one, Adeze said without smiling, and meant it entirely. The daughters grew like something that had been told it couldn't grow and decided to prove a point. Adeze, sharp, relentless, the kind of student teachers remembered for decades. She won a state scholarship at 16. By 24, she was already studying medicine in Enugu. Chisom, quieter, deeper, she read everything. She got into University of Lagos to study law on her own merit and almost cried when the admission letter came out, not from happiness, but from relief that the work had not been wasted. Ugochi, the one who had cried in the empty building, asking if they were going to die. She became an engineer, structural engineer. She said once in an interview years later that she spent her childhood watching things fall apart and had decided to spend her life building things that stayed. Amara, Adanna, and little Chidera, each one found her own lane and walked in it with particular confidence of someone who had learnt early that no one was coming to save them. Their mother had taught them that, not with words, but with everything else. Meanwhile, Emmanuel had not learnt anything. He had remarried in 2007. His new wife bore him 4 daughters. He sent them away. He married again in 2010. 5 daughters. He sent them away too. His third wife was different. She did not live quietly. She brought her brothers. There were raised voices, broken furniture, and a police report that went nowhere. But the message was received. He was alone by 2015. The construction work has dried up. His body, which he has never treated with particular kindness, began presenting its complaint all at once. Knees, back, pressure. He moved into a single room in a face me I face you in Ikorodu. The room smelled of methylated spirits and old decisions. His neighbors knew him as the man who coughed at night and argued with himself in the afternoon. Nobody asked about his family. He had made it clear in small and large ways that family was not a topic he could afford. In 2023, he recognized Ngozi right beside a young girl on television receiving an award. He later found out that the girl was Adana. He begged a young man to explain what was happening to him. He was told Adana had the highest JAMB score and was receiving a national recognition. He later found out that his daughters were successful, and then he decided to speak up because he thought he had a right to. He borrowed a smartphone. He made the video on a Wednesday, propped the phone against a cup, pressed record. He cried, real tears. Nobody could take that away from him. Whatever else it was, the pain was real. He was sick, he was alone, and somewhere in the locked room of his thinking, he genuinely could not understand how he ended up there. My children abandoned me, he said. I gave them life. I sacrificed, and they left me here to die like a dog. He tagged Adeze's, Chisom's, and Ugochi's Instagram accounts. 3,000 views, then 500,000 views. Then the daughter saw it. Adeze called her sisters on group video call that night. All 6 of them, doctor, lawyer, engineer, and the 3 others who had built quiet, studied lives far from Ajegunle. Nobody shouted. Nobody cried. They had done their crying a long time ago in an uncompleted building in Mushin on a foam mat in a raining corner. Chisom, the lawyer, spoke first. We respond calmly with facts. We don't match his energy. They agreed. Adeze made the response video herself. No ring light, no scripts, just her face, clear and composed, and the truth. Our father did not sacrifice for us, she said. He left us in an uncompleted building when the youngest was 3 weeks old. Our mother rode a commercial keke through Mushin to put us through school. Everything we have, we built. He's not lying because he's evil. He's lying because he lived so long with his own version of events that he has forgotten what actually happened. She paused. We don't hate him, but we will not carry the weight of a story that is not ours. The video was calm, dignified. He did not shout. He did not need to. The internet moved the way the internet moves when it finally gets the full picture. Comments flipped. People who had called the daughters wicked were now calling them strong. News blog picked up the story. A journalist tracked down Babatunde, still alive, older now, sitting on his porch in Mushin, and he confirmed everything. That woman, he told the reporter, shaking his head slowly, that woman was something else. She fell off my keke 3 times and never once talked about quitting. Her daughters are a reward. She earned every single one of them. Ngozi watched all of it from Chisom apartments in Lekki, where she had been living since 2020. She had her own room there, her own bedroom, a small balcony where she grew tomatoes in pots. Because old habits didn't die, they just found smaller spaces. Her daughters had offered to confront him publicly, to respond with receipts and record, and the full force of what they had become. She asked them to be gentle, not for his sake, for theirs. Anger is expensive, she told them. You have better things to spend your lives on. Whether Emmanuel ever reached out after that, whether he sat in a single room in Ikorodu and watched his daughter's faces on the small phone screen and felt something break open inside of him, nobody outside that family knows for certain. Some things happen in private, some reckonings happen in silence, without audience. What the world saw was this: a mother who had been handed nothing and built everything, six daughters who had been told their existence was a mistake and turned that into fuel, and a man who had spent 30 years chasing a son, a name, a legacy, a proof, and had found out at the end of his life that the legacy had been in his front all along. He threw it away by himself. The daughters did not call what they did forgiveness. They called it a choice not to let his own story to affect their lives. Moral of the story: a child is a child, be it a boy or a girl. Love your children, and if there is anyone that is suffering from this trauma, we love you and you are seen. If you watched the story this far, please drop a like, a comment, and subscribe. See you next time.